camera on you, and then you realize that certain things
You always have
are
backup
very
cheese.
interesting,
It's like
like
backup cheese
putting your
is. You always
fingers
would
through your
have
beard.
backup cheese. Like
I always have backup cheese, of course. Of course. If I get down to like a block and a half of cheese, it's like, oh my God, we
you
got to
get
get
more
more
cheese
cheese.
to compensate for the right.
Yeah, because you never know what could happen. I mean,
Right.
a block of cheese that's one day away, and then if you only have half left, and then you're not planning on going to the store, so
Right.
you gotta have lots of backup cheese. So
Backup cheese.
I feel like almost so maybe I appreciate that you sent me the link for the pop-up stopper,
Yeah.
but I have this slight feeling like our microphones look too similar now. Like
Yeah.
we're like,
Well, let's just let the record show that I had it first.
yeah,
Although it
you know what?
wasn't really documented because I don't think I used it. This is actually I'm just testing this mic out today. This is my backup mic. This is my primary mic back here.
It's an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah.
But it's interestingly the same pop filter makes it look like we're in
In a
closer
studio.
proximity to each
Right.
other.
Not
We're not
hundreds of miles away.
across thousands. We're thousands of miles away. Let's
Yeah.
not
Technically.
understate the
Technically.
awayness.
Well,
Trying to think of the what's the opposite of technically.
what is
Well, so I had a thought today. I thought we could talk about.
that sounds like a good place to start then.
It's the subject of momentum
Oh yeah.
because I tried
I'm
to.
lacking it.
I had an idea. I had an idea. I've had an
Oh my
idea for the
gosh, your
last 4
beard
days.
is so shorn.
You think it's shorn? Does it look shorter?
Oh, is not? I thought maybe you had shortened it. Is that as long as it's
I
been?
did. I tamed it
Yeah,
just slightly.
it looks tamed.
Oh, good.
Sorry, go ahead. You had momentum.
No. The
I
subject is
interrupted
momentum
your
because
momentum.
I didn't have momentum.
Oh,
So it's the last 4 days I got it into my head, this idea for a song, and I was just cooking on it. I was feeling really good, and but I had a thing. It was really sort of banjo based, and I was
do you
thinking
play the banjo?
I don't play the banjo,
I
and I
see.
was thinking, oh, I should get my friend, but then I was like, man, this thing is too complicated. It's gonna be a pain in the butt, and
You were
he's
saying
being
I should
very
get my
busy.
friend to do it. Is that what you
Yeah,
kind
I
of
was thinking
swallowed
that.
it?
I was thinking that was the starting point was to get my friend to work on it. So I sort of sat on it for 4 days, but I just like kept coming back to it. I was like singing it
Right.
several
Right.
times during the day, and I was like, I got to capture this basically the feeling that I have for the song.
Right.
So finally this morning, I I threw on the engines and turned on the recording equipment and stuff,
Yeah.
and it was just I just don't everything is harder when you haven't done something in a while.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And just and I was thinking about how the benefits of momentum and how when you're just doing something for the first time, every centimeter is a struggle. But there does get to a point where you don't even maybe realize how it happens. Like maybe you sort of you're doing something, and then little by little something's cooking, and then you're cruising. Um, and that's all. I guess all I have to say about the subject is that that seems like this is
Well,
the
so
hardest thing,
you're
especially for people like us who are trying to do this, who are trying to do that, or trying to do this other thing. That really in order to get anything to the point where it's really working well, I feel like you have to be in the flow of it, and that just takes so much more time.
well,
Who
so
has time?
you're in the flow of it, or you're not in. Like you've
No, I'm
had this
not. I'm
idea,
so
so you're
far
not in
away
the
from
flow.
this.
So just the basic mechanics of the story here. You got a great idea for a song, but you're out of practice recording songs, and so you're like, I got to do it. You get in there, and it's painful, inch by inch, slogging, and it's not like the muse isn't flowing through you into the instruments and onto the reels.
Yeah. I mean, everything that I've been reading lately is making me feel guilty because of the fact that it's all saying the same thing, which is you have to quality through quantity. This whole idea of
Oh yeah,
you
yeah.
make stuff, you make stuff, you make stuff. You don't be critical, you don't be critical, and then eventually you just sort of improve. Um, and it's hard for me to get into a pattern of a certain thing because I've got this interest and that interest, and I want to make this thing.
Mm,
So I'm like dabbling and dabbling and dabbling, and I think that that's the 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 downside of dabbling
right.
is you don't get the momentum.
Yeah. But I mean, you are someone who's done a lot of recording, a lot of music, a lot of recording over the years. So I can imagine it's, not there right now, but it also will come back without too much pedaling. And I would have to imagine that that all adds up. Yeah, maybe if all throughout maybe if you hadn't taken a break for the last months and you had been recording music all this time, that those things would be easier. They'd be right there. Those skills would be right there for you to use. But you also might be sick of it, or you might be uninspired, and you might. So it's like that is true, and you have to follow the energy where it
Yeah,
goes, so that it doesn't
right.
become a sloggy job.
I wonder how long it does seem. I mean, do you have either memories or stories or just thoughts about like how do you get momentum for something or how that's gone for you in the past? Like I imagine like when you were working on something, like Daddy Skills or something that like it started sort of but and then you sort of like went into a hole for a while and then it started to cook.
Mm-hmm.
Like how does that work?
It's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, I guess in those moments I have a sense of where the North Star is that I'm heading to, and then it's just like going in a hole and just like taking it step by step by step by step until you get there. But it is kind of with a clear sense of where that North Star is, or not clear sense, but some intuition about it. You know?
Well, let me ask you this: if you it, does it, how important is it in the early phases of working on it? How important is it that you're getting hints that you're going in the right direction? Because this morning when I was doing this, I had this thing. It's just cooking in my head. It's just cooking in my head, and then I
Yeah,
put it down, and there's just very little indication of the cookingness of it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then it's just like, oh, it's so hard
Well, that's
when
especially
it's not
hard.
there.
Yeah, it's especially hard for me with music. So I think I'm guessing I have a lot less skill than you recording music to a format that I'm happy with, just like less engineering skill and less translation skill. So I'll get things all the time in my head, maybe a little bit less lately, but all the time throughout my life, I'll get these ideas for songs in my head, and they're just like it's brilliant if the way I can hear it in my head. But translating that to any manifestation in the real world is beyond my powers, and that's so discouraging. It's so discouraging, and almost like if I start to lay it down, and I'm like, well, let me just find some temp synth instrument to, it's just like dead, dead within minutes because it's just like that amazing otherworldly thing that I could kind of hear is now this like tinny little dee doo 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 doo. It's just like it's just too the burden of
Yeah.
shame is too great to
The-
to push through. It reminds me I heard of one of the great hip hop beat makers was DJ Premier, and I've carried this with me for years because I heard that he would have an idea for a beat and he would want a certain sound, and then he would go searching through records for hours to find that sound until he found it. And which is just stunning to me because for me it's super fragile. If I have a sound or something in my head and I play it the wrong thing, it gets flushed. The brilliant thing gets flushed and replaced with the real life awful thing. So I still think about that, like how amazing that DJ Premier is able
that he
to
could hold it in his head through the
hold that and
search.
be like, no, not that, not that, not that, not that, for hours or days until he was like, that's the one. That's the thing I'm looking for.
Well, the smart thing is though, I do wonder So he's doing it in records, and this reminds me because I did one of these online master classes about recording once a couple of years ago, and
You leaned
and
slightly forward where it looked like you were going to advertise it. You said, I did one of these online masterclasses. Use
online
code.
master
This had
classes.
better be good for 30% off your first pet.
But really one of the big takeaways was that the first objective is the groove.
Mm.
Like if you can lay down a great groove, then everything else is so easy. And it reminds me of being in the studio, just like in a practice room with people, when if the groove is there, it's just becomes so easy to build on, because you just hear things, just like things start occurring to you all over the place.
Mm.
And so I think one of the things about what you're saying about DJ Premier is that because he's looking at records, those records already have the groove. When you're building it
Mm.
yourself, and it's like dook, 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 it just doesn't quite have
Yeah,
the
that's right.
groove. And it's all about the groove.
But you know, it's something. Even what you're saying reminds me that you're talking about playing instruments, which is also that's already a better situation than I sometimes find myself in, because I'll have some idea in my head that's like a symphonic something, you know, and like I'm at square one. Like how am I? Like at least
Yeah.
if you're thinking about a song with a guitar, you have a guitar, you play guitar well, you can record that, or you play with friend. You have friends that you can get in to come in and play banjo. If you're like, oh my god, it would be this incredible thing with six saxophones and an orchestra, where the hell do you go from there? You know, if
Yeah.
you're just a dude who has a computer and a keyboard somewhere.
Well, it does remind me. It's a good question. Is there a groove that can be that scaffolding underneath that, so that that, because it's true. Once you have something that just by itself just sort of like moves you, then yeah, you could add one instrument at a time and it's still fun, because a groove is a happy place. A
Hmm.
groove, you want to stay there. Whereas if you don't have it, like it's really true. Like if there's no groove, it's a painful place. If you're listening to a beat and it's not good, and you're
Yeah.
just like, every moment it's just your brain is telling you, get me out of here.
Yeah. Help! Help! Excuse me, excuse
I'm
me,
being assaulted by this
excuse
terrible
me,
beat.
ma'am,
Make it
excuse me,
stop.
ma'am. Yeah, you know, the other thing that happens to me too is I'll sometimes get the shred of an idea, and even if I put it down pretty well, the act of putting it into recording software sometimes can warp it. So like
Mm-hmm.
I'll do okay, I got this idea, and I do the couple of measures, and then I'll just pull a little thing so it repeats and loops. And now suddenly I've got this thing that loops over 16 bars, but that was never really the idea. You know what I mean? But
Mm-hmm.
it's sometimes you can get trapped by the form of the recording
Mm-hmm.
software. That's the sort of recurring theme for me, is keeping that vision of like, what was this supposed to be? Or, I mean, as I'm saying that, I realize that sometimes I let it evolve and change, just like in the act of recording it. But having an idea and trying to put that idea down is always just a real mix of um, difficult and discouraging, and then occasionally successful. But I'd say it's like a minority of the time for me that my ideas go successfully onto tape.
Yeah, it reminds me of this class that I took, that the way that they built up, it was like do a groove, and then you sort of find one part, and then you sort of work that part up, and then you find the second part, you do the verse, you do the chorus. And the idea that I had this morning is basically a song that already has four sections.
Hmm.
And when you're trying to do it all at once, like you really it's it's probably like a good business, that it's got to start with something simple, that you just dial in that one thing, and then you can add to it, because that's how the song initially got its shape and it's got its different sections, is that you were working with a bunch of people, you sort of got one groove, and you're like, oh god, this is great, now where do we go? And you have that one section sort of like already cooking. and then you can add to it. But when you're trying to do all of that in a computer at the same time, it's probably a bridge too far.
Yeah.
What is the larger lesson here? There must be some sort of larger.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm partly distracted by the fact that the sun is glinting right off the
I see
barbecue,
it
and
on your face.
it's like
Yeah.
it's like a terrible spotlight all of a sudden. I'm gonna I'm gonna
Much
block it.
like much like a beat that you don't like
Yeah,
hitting your brain in
yeah,
a certain way.
exactly. Well, I mean, it also occurs to me that like I think I've used the example of Prince too many times, but Prince had was one of the most prolific songwriters, but he had a massive back catalog of unreleased stuff, which probably is AKA not very great stuff. I mean, at some point they
Yeah,
released some
AKA
of
not
it.
as good. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like he had to just do a bunch of misses and record a bunch of stuff that was like okay, but and then he selected the stuff that he liked well enough to release. And they sometimes would release his back catalog stuff, B-sides and other. Well, B-sides was released anyway. Yeah, that sort of occurs to me. And then sometimes when someone dies, they go through and they release all their unreleased stuff, and
And
maybe
people are
the
like, "Oh, it's good. Yes."
his poor person is rolling over in their graves, going like, "I didn't want to release that."
Well, I've heard an interview of Eddie Murphy saying that people won't take him seriously as a musician because he's a comedian. So he's just like has all these master tapes of his music that he wants it released after he's dead. And it'd be interesting, like maybe it's just freaking, but you just gotta imagine that if he really, really nailed it, people wouldn't care if it was Eddie Murphy. It's so hard. Who am I to criticize? It's great by every standard except for like that weird zeitgeist sort of like, you know, Paul McCartney doesn't know how to write songs that hit as hard as Let It Be now, despite all of his experience.
Right, right.
I mean, there's
Yeah,
still cool little things that he does, but like it's not
are
like
there?
I've been told. I keep meaning to check out his later work because everybody says, "Oh yeah, it's really," and he's sort of like, and I would consider myself a fan of, I mean, a huge fan of Paul McCartney, and yet you'd think a fanatic would actually have listened to any of his last four records.
I know it's yeah. I think about that too. It's very strange. I mean, some of my
I should,
favorite.
I should, I owe it to him after
There are
all of the
very
gifts he's
few.
given me.
There are very few artists that I know more than a couple of their albums, and even like albums that I just loved, and then I'm aware that they've done stuff since, and I don't know. There's just not like I don't know. There's some people probably
Does anyone come to mind? Like, I mean, like, who is the closest to that for you?
that. Well, the person I've listened to the most albums, and I know the most albums, is Stevie Wonder. But again, with Stevie Wonder, it stops. I mean, he was scraping the bottom of the barrel by the time "Isn't She Lovely," those sort of 80s records with a couple of hits like "Isn't She Lovely," that's kind of as late as I go. There was one like more recent when I had a radio show. He had released a new album, and I think I played a song off of it, but I don't know. I was sort of going through the motions because it was a new album by Stevie Wonder. But like 70s, 60s, 70s Stevie Wonder is just peak. 70s probably 70s Stevie Wonder, and then 80s it starts to
But
starts to
it does. I
ramp
mean,
down.
it just goes to show that nobody knows how to do this.
Yeah. Well,
It's not like,
yeah,
I mean, there are things people know how to do, but I think the thing that people, when they have a song in their head and they think, "Oh my God, this thing it could be the greatest thing since sliced bread," no one knows how to like make a song sort of pop in the collective imagination.
right. Yeah.
It happens sometimes. It happens to people, and then in retrospect they're like, "Oh well, it's the way you do it is you have to eat a cereal bar at 8 a.m. and then
Right.
follow it up with coffee at 9 o'clock, and then I wrote this song."
Yeah.
It's like, you don't
Well, I've
know.
always
You
sort of
don't
assumed it
know.
was also just something about youth, just inherently um there's that energy that you have in
I
youth.
don't. I mean, the Buena Vista Social club hit the collective imagination pretty hard. And
That's true.
and I think it probably the youth thing has to do with the fact that a lot more young people are at it. And so it's just like you see someone come up and yeah, more likely they're going to be young because that's who's putting all the work in.
Paul Simon, that's another one where I would know like a lot of his catalog. Not a huge fan of the super early Simon and Garfunkel stuff, but like mid career, early career solo Paul Simon, all the way up through mid career Paul Simon is just like home run. And then again, 80s, he hits like You Can Call Me Al. And then there was, You Can Call Me Al was great, but that was about the end of what I would think of as a sweet spot of Paul Simon. And then I know he's put out stuff since. I remember hearing one Father and Son. No, not Father and Son. That's Cat Stevens. Anyway, I remember hearing a new album that he had put out,
Yeah.
but it's just like you just kind of don't have space for it. You don't have a spot for that. You know what I mean? Like, ooh, let me
But
listen.
I
And
contend if there was a song that just really it doesn't have to do with his age. It could be that because of his age and maybe because of his success that there's a certain thing that's not there from in the songwriting. But I really think that if the song was there, it could be a huge hit. Like there's nothing.
yeah, maybe you're right. Here's one example of that. So I've never been much of a fan of Michael Franti. Do you know Michael Franti? Uh,
Yeah, of course.
yeah.
I thought it was Fronty.
Well, you could be right. I've always heard Franti, but I've never been much of a fan of his, but I thought his sort of heyday was a couple decades ago, and I think he's got a hit that was just recently a hit on the radio. Hey to something something, but I'll be gone again someday. The more I
Yeah.
something, the more. Yeah, I think that's like a big radio hit now. I'm like,
It's
how do
like
you
his
do
only
that?
radio hit.
Ever?
I feel like yeah, he was well, he didn't have hits before. He
You're
had lots
right.
of fans. And
Yeah.
that was the only time I ever heard him on the radio. And I was like, "Oh, you really." And if there's a line in it too. He's just like, "What if this song was on the radio? Why not? I mean, why don't we
How
imagine a
about
better
it?
world in which I have a hit song?" That was basically I was like, "Oh, Fronty,
Yeah.
where's your
Well,
populist roots?"
that's a late career radio hit.
Yeah.
Surprising. Well, all right, man.
This has been an interesting discussion of that. Um. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Hey, when the moment arrives, I guess we should let it arrive. Cheers
Cheers and broadcast.
and broadcast.